King Charles has named his youngest brother, Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh.
A surprising legal development has reignited speculation.
In recent months, a wave of YouTube videos and tabloid-style content has circulated claiming that Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, has a secret inheritance that his lawyers have finally confirmed, that King Charles tried to strip him of his home and his wife's jewelry, and that a hidden family feud nearly tore the monarchy apart. None of this holds up against the public record. There's no evidence of secret letters, legal threats, or a covert power struggle between Buckingham Palace and Bagshot Park. What does exist is a much less dramatic but genuinely interesting story. A prince who spent decades outside the spotlight, built one of the more unusual careers in modern royal history, and ended up quite openly, through documented decisions made by two different monarchs, holding the same title his father held for over 70 years. This article lays out what is actually known and documented about Prince Edward, his path into royal life, his marriage and title history, the real and well-reported facts about his home at Bagshot Park, how he came to be named Duke of Edinburgh in 2023, and the expanded role he and his wife Sophie have taken on in recent years. It draws entirely on public reporting and royal records rather than the invented, insider claims that circulate in clickbait royal content. Prince Edward Anthony Richard Louis was born at Buckingham Palace on March 10, 1964, the fourth and youngest child of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. At birth, he stood third in line to the throne. Today, following decades of royal births elsewhere in the family, he sits much further down the order of succession, 15th as of 2026. His upbringing followed a fairly conventional path for a royal child of his generation. Heatherdown School, followed by Gordonstown in Scotland for his A-levels, the same school his father and elder brother Charles had attended. As part of his gap year, he spent time teaching at Whanganui Collegiate School in New Zealand before going on to read history at Jesus College, Cambridge, where he graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1986. What set Edward apart from his siblings was what came next. He briefly joined the Royal Marines, following family tradition, but left the training program after a matter of months, a decision that was unusual for a royal son but far from scandalous. He then pursued something almost no one in his family had tried before, a career in entertainment. He worked as a production assistant for Andrew Lloyd Webber's Really Useful Theatre Company, contributing to major stage productions including The Phantom of the Opera and Cats. He later moved into television production and eventually founded his own company, Arden Productions, which focused on historical documentaries and royal-themed programming. Edward ran Arden Productions for more than a decade before stepping back from it in 2002 to take up full-time royal duties. The move away from show business and toward formal royal responsibilities marked the beginning of the role he has occupied ever since, a steady, low-profile working member of the family rather than a headline-generating one. In June 1999, Edward married Sophie Rhys-Jones, a public relations executive, in a ceremony at St. George's Chapel, Windsor. The wedding itself broke with royal convention in a couple of notable ways. Rather than the grand, internationally broadcast ceremonies associated with his siblings' weddings, Edward and Sophie opted for a comparatively intimate service. And rather than being created a duke on his wedding day, the traditional practice for sons of the sovereign, Edward was instead given the titles Earl of Wessex and Viscount Severn. At the time, Buckingham Palace announced that Edward would eventually be created Duke of Edinburgh, once the dukedom, then held by his father, ultimately reverted to the crown. This was not a rumor or a leaked secret. It was a public statement made in 1999, more than 2 decades before it actually happened. In March 2019, on the occasion of his birthday, Queen Elizabeth II granted her son the additional title Earl of Forfar. Edward and Sophie's 2 children, Lady Louise Windsor, born in 2003, and James, now known as the Earl of Wessex, born in 2007, grew up with the Lady and Viscount courtesy titles typically used by children of an earl, rather than the Prince and Princess styles their cousins in the direct line use. This, too, was a deliberate and publicly discussed choice by the family, intended to give the children a comparatively normal upbringing outside the full glare of royal life. Much of the fabricated inheritance dispute content circulating online centers on Bagshot Park, the Grade 2 listed 120-room mansion in Surrey, where Edward and Sophie have lived since their marriage in 1999. The actual history of the property, and the couple's tenancy there, is a matter of public record, not secret documents smuggled out of a palace archive. Bagshot Park sits on roughly 51 acres within Windsor Great Park and has a royal connection stretching back centuries. The current house was built in 1879 for Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught, Queen Victoria's third son. Before Edward and Sophie moved in, the property had been used by the Ministry of Defense to house the Army Chaplains Department, and it was returned to the Crown Estate in 1996. According to a National Audit Office report on the arrangement, the Crown Estate leased Bagshot Park to Edward, then the Earl of Wessex, in March 1998, following detailed negotiations. The original terms gave him a 50-year lease with an initial annual rent of £5,000 before renovation work was completed, rising to around £90,000 a year afterward, a figure the Crown Estate's independent advisors deemed consistent with market value for residential use of that size and location. Edward is reported to have personally invested more than £1.3 million in renovating the property, with the Crown Estate contributing a further sum toward the roughly £3 to £4 million refurbishment. In 2007, Edward extended the arrangement significantly. Through his company, Eclipse Nominees Ltd., he paid around £5 million upfront for a new 150-year lease, described in reporting at the time as market-tested. Since that renegotiation, however, some of the underlying documentation has been redacted in land registry filings, and more recent reporting, including a 2025 investigation by The Times, has drawn attention to the fact that Edward now pays only a nominal peppercorn rent for the property, a common legal arrangement in long leaseholds, but one that has drawn public criticism given the scale and value of the estate, now estimated at roughly £30 million. Coverage in early 2026 added a further wrinkle. Reports that the couple have been earning as much as £130,000 a year by subletting a converted stable block near the main house's office space, with the income going to the couple rather than to public funds. Critics, including the anti-monarchy campaign group Republic, have argued this compounds the unfairness of a peppercorn rent arrangement on a state-owned property. Clarence House has not denied these reports. None of this involves a secret letter from Queen Elizabeth II, a legal threat to expose damaging correspondence, or a behind-the-scenes standoff between Edward's lawyers and the king. It is a fairly ordinary, if occasionally controversial story about a long-term Crown Estate lease, publicly reported rent figures, and legitimate questions from commentators and taxpayer advocates about whether royal residents get preferential terms. That is a real and reportable controversy in its own right. It does not need to be dressed up as a hidden inheritance battle to be interesting. The title Duke of Edinburgh has been created 4 times in British history since 1726. Most recently for Prince Philip in 1947 upon his marriage to the then Princess Elizabeth. Philip held the title for more than 70 years, until his death in 2021, at which point it passed to Charles, then Prince of Wales. When Charles became king following Queen Elizabeth II's death in September 2022, the dukedom merged back into the crown, becoming available to be created anew, exactly as had been signaled back in 1999. On March 10, 2023, Edward's 59th birthday, King Charles III formally conferred the Dukedom of Edinburgh on his younger brother. Buckingham Palace's announcement made clear that the title will be held by Edward for His Royal Highness's lifetime, a significant and openly stated departure from the traditional hereditary pattern of most dukedoms. Unlike most titles in the peerage, which pass down through heirs male of the body, Edward's ducal title is explicitly non-hereditary. It will revert to the crown upon his death rather than pass automatically to his son James. Royal commentators noted this distinction prominently at the time, describing it as evidence of a personal decision by Charles to honor his brother rather than a routine transfer of hereditary property. With the title came a symbolic continuation of Prince Philip's legacy. Edward and Sophie became patrons of the Duke of Edinburgh's award, the youth development charity Philip founded in 1956. Edward had earned his own gold award in the scheme back in 1986 and has remained closely tied to it ever since. In 2026, the charity marked its 70th anniversary, with Edward playing a leading role in the celebrations, which by then had reached young people in more than 130 countries. It's worth noting that speculation had briefly circulated in late 2022, shortly after Charles became king, that Buckingham Palace might instead hold the Edinburgh dukedom back for one of Prince William's children in the future, rather than giving it to Edward. Clarence House did not deny those reports at the time. In the end, the title went to Edward regardless, a decision publicly announced rather than leaked or contested. Much of Edward's rising public profile over the past several years has a straightforward, well-documented explanation that has nothing to do with palace intrigue. The working royal family has simply gotten smaller. Prince Andrew's withdrawal from public duties, followed by Prince Harry and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, stepping back from royal life in 2020, left fewer senior royals available to carry out the hundreds of engagements the institution undertakes each year. Edward and Sophie were among those who absorbed a larger share of that workload. That shift was formalized in law in late 2022, when Parliament fast-tracked legislation adding both Edward and his sister, Princess Anne, to the list of councillors of state, the small group of senior royals legally permitted to carry out certain official duties on the monarch's behalf when the king is unavailable or incapacitated. In 2023, Edward reportedly undertook 297 official royal engagements, the third highest total of any working royal that year, behind only King Charles and Princess Anne. The couple's role expanded further after King Charles's cancer diagnosis was announced in February 2024. As the King and Queen Camilla adjusted their schedules around his treatment, Edward increasingly stepped in to represent the family at public events, everything from youth boxing programs to national cycling championships to badminton exhibitions, reinforcing his reputation, as some royal commentators have put it, as a dependable steady hand within a more streamlined monarchy. Sophie, too, has taken on a heavier public schedule during this period, and the two are frequently described by royal watchers as having become something like the operational backbone of routine royal engagements, a role that, notably, has been achieved through consistent, unremarkable public service rather than through any dramatic legal or family confrontation. Stories about tension between Charles and Edward do have some basis in the historical record, though the reality is far more mundane than a royal feud. Royal biographer Ingrid Seward, in her book on Prince Edward, has written about a specific and fairly minor disagreement: Edward's choice not to wear a kilt at a family gathering in Scotland, reportedly because, unlike Charles, who attended Gordonstown and developed a strong personal connection to Scottish tradition. Through his own schooling, Edward didn't feel that wearing Highland dress reflected his own background. Charles was said to be disappointed by the decision. That single specific anecdote appears to be the primary documented source for years of recurring feud speculation in tabloid coverage, rather than any sustained or ongoing conflict. Set against that minor episode is a substantial body of evidence pointing toward a functional, cooperative relationship between the brothers: Edward's appointment as Councillor of State, his elevation to Duke of Edinburgh by Charles's own decision in 2023, his appointment to the Order of the Thistle on his 60th birthday in 2024, and his steadily increasing workload supporting the king through his health treatment. None of that is consistent with the kind of deep institutional rift described in speculative online content. As for Princess Anne, the record does support a long-standing closeness between her and Edward, though it's best characterized not as a secret alliance but as a shared professional style. Both are known for consistently high engagement counts, a preference for substance over publicity, and a reputation, reinforced across decades of royal reporting, for reliability rather than headline chasing. Their relationship has never required a dramatic intervention to be noteworthy. It has simply been a matter of two working royals with compatible temperaments and overlapping values. No account of Edward's public life is complete without Sophie, whose own trajectory mirrors his in several ways. Before her marriage, Sophie Rhys-Jones worked in public relations, running her own PR consultancy for several years before stepping back from it after her engagement, partly in response to controversy over the business mixing commercial work with her royal connections. Like Edward, she spent years building a reputation for careful, unshowy public service rather than headline-grabbing appearances, and she has become known among royal watchers for a particularly close, almost daughter-like relationship with Queen Elizabeth II during the late Queen's lifetime, a bond frequently referenced in royal biographies and retrospectives written after 2022. Sophie holds an extensive list of her own royal patronages and honorary military appointments, including the Dame Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order and the Dame Grand Cross of the Order of St. John. In recent years, she has taken on increasingly high-profile international work, including visits addressing conflict-related sexual violence and humanitarian issues, work that has drawn praise from officials and campaigners independent of her royal role. Together, Edward and Sophie are frequently described in royal reporting, including by outlets not particularly sympathetic to the monarchy, as the most consistently reliable double act among the working royals, a reputation built over roughly 25 years rather than acquired suddenly. Edward's formal honors reflect both his family's standing and decades of accumulated service. He is a Royal Knight Companion of the Order of the Garter, one of the oldest and most senior orders of chivalry in the British honours system, and an extra Knight of the Order of the Thistle, Scotland's equivalent, the latter conferred by King Charles in 2024 to mark Edward's 60th birthday. He also holds the Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order and serves as a personal aide-de-camp to the sovereign. On the military side, Edward holds a number of honorary appointments consistent with his family's long-standing ties to the armed forces, despite his own brief and unglamorous stint in the Royal Marines as a young man. He serves as Royal Honorary Colonel of the Royal Wessex Yeomanry and the London Guards, and as Royal Colonel of the 2nd Battalion of Rifles, a role that has seen him visit troops at their base in Northern Ireland and in the past, in operational theaters including Afghanistan alongside Sophie. He also holds Commodore-in-Chief and Honorary Air Commodore appointments within the Royal Fleet Auxiliary and RAF respectively, along with several Canadian regimental colonelcies, Colonel-in-Chief of the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment, the Prince Edward Island Regiment, and the Saskatchewan Dragoons. These are largely ceremonial roles, as is typical for royal family members without an active military career, but they form a documented, verifiable list, a useful contrast to the vague, unsourced, insider claims that anchor most viral royal drama content. Every title above appears on the royal family's own website and in independent reference sources like Debrett's, rather than in anonymous reports attributed to unnamed legal representatives. If there is a single cause most closely associated with Edward's public identity, it is the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, the youth development program his father founded in 1956 to help young people build confidence, resilience, and practical skills through structure challenges. Edward earned his own Gold Award in 1986, and his connection to the program deepened significantly after he took over patronage duties as Prince Philip aged and later, after Philip's death in 2021. By 2026, the award marked its 70th anniversary, having reached young people in more than 130 countries, a scale that makes it one of the most geographically extensive youth programs associated with the British monarchy. Edward has used his role at the helm of the charity to travel extensively, meeting participants and coordinating with the program's international affiliates, work that rarely generates tabloid headlines but represents a substantial share of his actual working schedule. He also holds patronages tied to the National Youth Theatre, a natural extension of his early theatre career, the Sport and Recreation Alliance, and the British Paralympic Association, alongside more than 70 patronages and organizational affiliations in total. In February 2026, he took on the role of Royal Patron of the British Exploring Society, succeeding his father in supporting youth wilderness expeditions, another example of Edward quietly inheriting specific causes his father championed rather than titles or property in the sense implied by inheritance dispute content. As King Charles continues cancer treatment, and the monarchy's long-term planning increasingly centers on the eventual